"You're trespassing, sir. Turn the truck around before I have you removed." That was the first thing Vanessa Whitmore said to me while standing on land I owned. Behind her, a string quartet played under a white cedar pavilion that hadn't existed 3 months earlier. Champagne glasses clicked beneath strands of warm lights. Nearly 200 wedding guests wandered across a meadow I had purchased with the rest of Blackridge Ranch, all 3,200 acres of it. I could smell fresh-cut cedar, expensive perfume, and the pale dust rising from a gravel parking lot somebody had built without my permission. My name is Cole Barrett, and that Saturday morning I wasn't dressed for a wedding. Work boots, faded jeans, canvas jacket, dust covering my pickup from the 8-mile ranch road behind me. The security guard at the entrance looked me over like I'd wandered into the wrong country club. "Private event," he said, one hand resting on his clipboard. "Silver Pines, HOA property." I killed the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab made the distant violin sound strangely clear. Then I opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. Crunch, crunch. Every step reminded me that 6 weeks earlier this spot had been grass. Vanessa came toward me wearing a cream-colored suit and sunglasses, carrying herself like the entire valley had been reserved under her name. "Mr. Barrett," she said, "we've already discussed this. You have no authorization to be here." I didn't answer immediately. Something beside her shoe had caught my attention. A round steel survey cap, barely visible through the gravel. Mud covered half the stamped numbers, but I recognized it instantly. I had photographed that marker the week I closed on Blackridge Ranch. It marked the eastern boundary line. My boundary line. Vanessa was standing less than 10 feet inside it. Behind her stood a commercial wedding pavilion, a catering building, portable bars, landscaping, electrical service, and a parking lot filled with SUVs. All of it was on my side. She followed my eyes toward the marker, then deliberately stepped in front of it. "You need to leave." Her voice had lost the polished sweetness. "Now." I looked past her toward a wooden sign beside the entrance. "Willow Crest Wedding Estate. Private property." The irony almost made me smile. 3 months earlier, there had been no resort, no pavilion, no parking lot, just pasture, cedar trees, and an old service road cutting towards Silver Pines Estates. Now Vanessa had built an entire business there and apparently convinced herself that enough lumber, gravel, paperwork, and confidence could move a property line. The guard raised his radio. "Do you want me to call somebody?" Vanessa asked. "You probably should," I said. Her mouth tightened. She had no idea I'd already made that call. Then, somewhere beyond the cedar ridge, faint enough that the wedding guests kept drinking champagne, I heard tires humming over the ranch road. I glanced at my watch. 11:17 a.m. Right on time. Vanessa heard it too. "Expecting someone?" she asked. I looked down at that steel survey marker one more time. "Actually," I said, "I think you are." 3 months earlier, Blackridge Ranch had been quiet enough that I could hear the wind moving through the cedar trees from half a mile away. I had closed on the property on a Monday morning in late March, signed the last page at the county title office, and driven straight out there before the ink had time to dry. 3,200 acres sounds enormous until you are standing in the middle of it with nothing but fence lines, limestone ridges, open pasture, and an old ranch road disappearing toward the horizon. I had spent 21 years working as a land surveyor and heavy equipment contractor, so land never looked empty to me. I saw drainage patterns, boundary corners, access routes, grades, easements, and the small physical details most people drove past without noticing. Blackridge had plenty of those details. The previous owner, Walter Grady, had run cattle there until his knees finally convinced him retirement was smarter than stubbornness. He kept meticulous records. Deeds, plats, utility easements, tax maps, even handwritten notes about fence repairs. That paperwork was one reason I felt comfortable buying the place. The other was the survey I commissioned before closing. I trusted records, but I trusted steel. In the ground more. 2 days after getting the keys, I spent nearly 9 hours checking boundary monuments against the new survey. That was when I noticed the Eastern Service Road. According to Walter, it had once been used by utility crews maintaining power lines near Silver Pines Estates, the upscale development bordering roughly 2 miles of my property. The road itself was mine. The recorded utility easement was narrow and specific. Maintenance access. Nothing more. But the dirt told another story. Fresh tire tracks crossed it. Wide ones. Several vehicles, judging by the tread patterns. I crouched and rubbed the soil between my fingers. Still loose underneath. Recent. Farther down the road, I found a steel survey marker beside a cedar post. Someone had sprayed white paint across the top, almost as if they wanted to make it easier to find later. I photographed it with my phone, including the stamped identification numbers, then measured its position against my survey coordinates. Exact match. I remember hearing a lawn mower somewhere beyond the tree line while I stood there. Silver Pines was close, but from Blackridge you could barely see it. That was exactly why I had bought the ranch. I wanted distance. Space. A place where nobody measured my mailbox or told me what color a barn should be. I had no plans for subdivisions or luxury houses. I wanted to restore the old cattle operation, repair the creek crossings, rebuild Walter's equipment barn, and eventually put a small house on the western ridge where the sunsets turned the limestone orange. Simple plans. Honest work. I took one last photograph of that white-painted marker before driving back toward the ranch house. The next morning, a white luxury sport utility vehicle was parked beside my gate. A woman in sunglasses was waiting for me, holding a leather folder against her chest. She smiled before I even stepped out of my truck. "Cole Barrett?" she asked. "Vanessa Whitmore, president of Silver Pines Homeowners Association." Then she looked past me at my ranch like she already knew exactly what she wanted from it. Vanessa had the kind of smile that looked practiced in front of bathroom mirrors and closing tables. Perfect teeth, perfect posture, not one strand of blonde hair out of place despite the Texas wind pushing dust across my gate. She held out her hand. I shook it once. Her perfume smelled expensive enough to have its own property tax. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. I looked past her towards Silver Pines, mostly hidden behind cedar and live oak. "I did not realize Blackridge was in your neighborhood." Her smile stayed exactly where it was. "Not technically, of course, but our communities share certain interests." That word caught me. Communities. Blackridge was one ranch with one owner. Me. Vanessa opened her leather folder and produced a glossy aerial map. Silver Pines sat along my eastern boundary in neat little rows of oversized roofs, swimming pools, and curved streets. Someone had highlighted a strip running from the subdivision across my service road and into the meadow beyond it. "We have maintained this corridor for years," she said. "Residents use it for walking, photography, seasonal events. It has become an important community amenity." I studied the map. The highlighted strip crossed the same utility easement Walter Grady had documented. "Utility crews have access," I said. "Your residents do not." Her sunglasses tilted slightly as she studied me. "Walter was always flexible. Walter sold the ranch." I handed the map back. "I am not." That was when she changed tactics. She told me Silver Pines was expanding its amenities. Property values were rising. Families wanted outdoor gathering space. Then she mentioned the eastern meadow, 42 acres of open grass framed by cedar trees with a shallow creek along the southern edge. She called it underutilized. I called it mine. Vanessa offered to purchase a narrow strip first. Then she offered a long-term access agreement. I declined both. The wind rattled the cottonwood leaves above us. Somewhere behind the gate, an old windmill squeaked once every few seconds. Vanessa closed her folder slowly. "You bought acreage, Mr. Barrett. You did not buy your way out of community standards." I almost laughed. "I am not a member of your homeowners association. That can be more complicated than people realize." She stepped toward her sport utility vehicle. "You should review the historical agreements before making permanent decisions." Then she drove away, leaving a thin cloud of dust hanging over the road. The next afternoon, a certified envelope arrived at the ranch house. Silver Pines letterhead. Heavy paper. 3 pages of legal language describing the eastern meadow as shared community use property under what they called a historical access agreement. I read it twice. Then I pulled Walter's records from the metal file cabinet. The only recorded agreement I could find was the utility easement I already knew about. 12 feet wide. Power maintenance only. No recreation. No events. No homeowners association rights. I drove to the eastern boundary before sunset. The white-painted survey marker was still there, but something else had changed. 20 yards beyond it, tied to a cedar branch, was a bright orange ribbon. Then another, stretching across my meadow in a straight line. I followed them for nearly half a mile until I found a wooden stake driven into the soil. Fresh sawdust still clung around its base. Written across the top in black marker were 3 words that made the evening suddenly feel very quiet. Future event access. By 7 the next morning, the orange ribbons were gone. Not removed carefully. Gone. Whoever had placed them had taken every strip except one tangled around a cedar branch near the creek. I photographed it, recorded the coordinates, and drove back toward the ranch house with dust rolling behind my truck. 2 days later, the sound of diesel engines woke me before sunrise. I stepped onto the porch with coffee in my hand and heard machinery working somewhere east of the house. The low growl carried across the pasture for almost a mile. By the time I reached the meadow, a compact excavator was pulling old fence posts from the ground. A skid steer was clearing brush beside the service road. 3 workers in reflective vests were measuring a path directly through my property. The smell of diesel mixed with crushed cedar hung in the cool morning air. I parked across the road and walked toward the foreman. Who authorized this? He shut down the excavator and handed me a work order. Silver Pines Community Improvement Project. The authorization line carried Vanessa Whitmore's signature. You are on private property, I said. His expression changed immediately. We were told the association controlled this section. They do not. I photographed every page before asking the crew to stop until ownership could be verified. They packed up without arguing. Vanessa was less cooperative. She arrived 40 minutes later in that white sport utility vehicle, tires snapping over loose gravel, and stepped out carrying another folder. This is becoming unnecessarily difficult, she said. Someone sent contractors onto my ranch for improvements covered by existing access rights. Utility access does not mean event access. She opened the folder and handed me a county permit showing road improvements, grading, temporary electrical service, and something labeled Community Pavilion Development. The parcel map attached to it stopped me cold. The boundary line was wrong. According to that map, Silver Pines extended hundreds of feet farther west than the survey completed before my purchase. Their version swallowed the service road and most of the eastern meadow. Where did you get this? I asked. Vanessa smiled. County records. I drove directly to the county development office. The fluorescent lights hummed above me while a clerk pulled the digital file. Same map. Same shifted boundary. Same permit approvals. I showed her my closing survey. She compared both documents, frowned, then explained that any dispute would need formal review before the county could determine which record controlled the permits. That process could take weeks, maybe longer. When I returned to Blackridge that afternoon, the machinery was running again. Vanessa stood beside the road, watching gravel pour from a dump truck. She did not even bother walking over. She just raised one hand in a little wave. Over the next 10 days, my fence disappeared section by section. The service road widened. Trenches appeared for electrical conduit. Trucks crossed the meadow from sunrise until evening. I sent Silver Pines a formal cease and desist notice. Their attorney answered with 12 pages of citations, historical use claims, and threats of damages if I interfered with permitted construction. Then a glossy advertisement appeared online. Willow Crest Wedding Estate. Rustic Luxury. Private Texas Meadow. Reservations opening soon. I stared at the photographs and recognized my cedar trees in the background. Vanessa had not just crossed my property line. She was selling it. The next morning, I found her standing beside the construction site while workers unloaded fresh lumber. Maybe you should have researched what you bought, she said. I looked at the county map in her hand, then at the land beneath her shoes. For the first time since closing, a question I hated entered my mind. What if she was right? I hated that question enough to spend the next 4 nights proving it wrong. My kitchen table disappeared under plats, deeds, tax maps, utility records, and survey notes until there was barely enough room left for a coffee mug. The house smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Every night, I started with the same assumption. Maybe I had missed something. Pride is expensive when land is involved, and 21 years of surveying had taught me that the fastest way to make a bad problem worse was to fall in love with your own conclusion. So I checked everything again. Bearings, distances, monument references, recorded easements, parcel descriptions. The Blackridge deed matched Walter Grady's records. My closing survey matched the older plats. The 12-foot utility easement was exactly where it should have been. Only the county map supporting Vanessa's permits told a different story. At 2:17 on Thursday morning, I finally saw it. One coordinate was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, Just enough. I pulled my calculator closer, ran the numbers again, then compared the county filing against a 1998 boundary survey. 27 feet. That was the shift at the first control point. Farther south, the error widened because the entire line had been projected from that bad coordinate. By the time it reached the meadow, Vanessa's version had swallowed enough of Blackridge to fit her pavilion, parking area, and access road inside Silver Pines. I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum. 27 feet. Small enough to look like clerical noise. Large enough to steal a meadow on paper. At sunrise, I drove east with my survey equipment in the truck bed. The grass was wet enough to darken my boots. I started at the white-painted steel marker I had photographed after closing. My receiver locked onto the coordinate. Exact match with my survey. Then I checked the next monument. Also correct. The land had not moved. The county map had. I followed the line south until I reached the cedar where I had found the orange ribbon. Something in the dirt caught the morning light. A shallow rectangular depression. Freshly disturbed soil. I brushed away loose dirt and found the edge of another steel monument several inches below grade. Someone had tried to bury it. That was when I remembered the trail camera. Walter had left 3 wildlife cameras around the eastern pasture, and I had replaced their memory cards after closing. One faced the service road. Back at the ranch house, I loaded the footage onto my computer and started scrolling. Deer. Wind. A utility truck. More deer. Then, 6 days before Vanessa first visited me, a Silver Pines maintenance pickup appeared. 2 men got out near the boundary. One carried a shovel. The other carried marking paint. I leaned closer to the screen. They located the steel monument, photographed it, painted the top white, and measured west from it. Later footage showed another crew returning near the second marker. By then I understood what the orange ribbons had really been. They were not marking an existing boundary. They were laying out a new one. I printed still images, copied the original files onto 2 separate drives, and called the county surveyor's office. Then I called a property attorney named Rachel Monroe, someone I had worked with years earlier on a highway easement dispute. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short silence. Cole, she said, do not confront Vanessa again. Preserve everything. I looked through the window toward the eastern meadow, where the distant frame of Vanessa's pavilion was rising above my cedar trees. For weeks, I had been trying to stop her from building. That morning, I realized the smarter move might be to let her keep going. Rachel's advice sounded backward, but by Friday morning it made perfect sense. If I rushed into court with a half-built pavilion and a disputed map, Vanessa could call the whole thing a misunderstanding. If she kept building after receiving my cease and desist notice, after seeing my survey, and after being warned that ownership was contested, every new invoice became another piece of evidence. So I stopped trying to rescue her from her own decisions. I did not touch the equipment. I did not block the contractors. I did not move a single orange stake. I documented. Every morning before work, I drove the eastern service road with a camera on the dashboard. Gravel trucks arrived first, then electricians, then landscapers. The pavilion grew from bare framing into polished cedar beams and a wide limestone patio. Decorative lights appeared between the trees. A catering building went up near the creek. Within 3 weeks, the meadow smelled less like grass and more like sawdust, fresh asphalt, and new paint. Vanessa interpreted my silence exactly the way Rachel predicted. She thought I had surrendered. Her emails changed from legal threats to victory laps. One informed me that Silver Pines would begin controlling access to the eastern service road for safety reasons. Another warned that my ranch vehicles could interfere with scheduled events. I saved every message. Then the website went live. Willow Crest Wedding Estate offered what it called an exclusive private Texas ranch experience, even though Vanessa did not own the ranch. Weekend packages started at $11,000. The photographs showed sunsets over my pasture, my creek, my cedar grove, even the western ridge in the distance. I created a folder and saved every page with the date and time. Rachel collected copies of vendor agreements and permit records through formal requests. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Silver Pines had represented the disputed acreage as association-controlled property. In multiple applications, Vanessa had signed several of them herself. Then came the advertisement for the grand opening. Saturday, 11 o'clock, 200 guests expected. Full catering, live music, valet parking, Vanessa had chosen the largest possible audience for her first event. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with that advertisement glowing on my laptop while rain tapped softly against the window. Rachel called shortly after 9. "The county surveyor confirmed your monuments," she said. "Your deed description is consistent with the historical plats. Their permit map is not." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "So we stop construction now?" "Not yet." Her voice was calm. "There is another issue. The trail camera footage had been forwarded to the county because tampering with recognized boundary monuments could not simply be treated as a homeowners association disagreement. The altered permit records had raised additional questions. Rachel told me someone from the sheriff's office wanted to speak with me. That afternoon, I met Sheriff Daniel Mercer at the county administration building. He was 56, gray at the temples, with the patient voice of a man who preferred documents to drama. He examined the survey, photographs, recorded easement, and original camera files. Then he asked one question. "When is their first commercial event?" "Saturday morning." Mercer closed the folder. "Do not interfere with the event yourself. Be available by telephone." I nodded. Before leaving, I asked what would happen Saturday. He gave me no dramatic promise. He simply said, "If what you provided checks out, Mr. Barrett, we will come see the property." Vanessa spent Friday decorating the resort. I spent Friday washing ranch dust off my pickup, charging my phone, and placing one original survey copy behind the driver's seat. Saturday morning, at 10:45, I turned onto the service road and headed toward the sound of violins. By the time I reached the meadow, Vanessa had turned 42 acres of disputed ranch land into something from a luxury brochure. White chairs stood in perfect rows beneath the cedar trees. Strings of warm bulbs stretched above the limestone patio. A florist was arranging white roses around the pavilion, while servers carried trays between the catering building and long tables covered in cream-colored linen. The air smelled like cedar, coffee, fresh flowers, and crushed limestone. I counted more than 70 vehicles already parked where cattle had been grazing 3 months earlier. Near the entrance, the new wooden sign gleamed in the morning sun. Willow Crest Wedding Estate. Private property. I slowed my pickup. A security guard stepped into the road and raised one hand. I stopped 10 feet from him. "Private event," he said. "You will need to turn around. I own this road." He glanced toward a golf cart parked near the pavilion. "Sir, I have instructions from management." Vanessa appeared less than a minute later. Cream-colored suit, sunglasses, leather folder tucked beneath one arm. She walked toward my truck with the confidence of someone who believed construction had transformed paperwork into ownership. "Cole," she said, loud enough for several nearby guests to hear. "We have been through this." I stepped out and closed the door. "Have we?" Her smile tightened. "This property belongs to Silver Pines. You have no authorization to enter an association facility." I could see phones turning toward us now. Not many, but enough. The security guard shifted beside me. I kept my hands loose at my sides and my voice level. "I want to make sure I understand what you are saying. You are claiming the pavilion, parking area, service road, and meadow belong to Silver Pines." Vanessa looked around at the finished resort as if the answer were obvious. "Yes." "And you authorize construction here?" "As association president, yes. And Silver Pines is operating this as a commercial wedding venue." She gave a small, impatient laugh. "Obviously." I nodded once. That is all I needed. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then she recovered. "Security, please escort Mr. Barrett back to his vehicle." "No need." I walked toward my truck, but I stopped beside the entrance sign. The steel survey cap was still visible near Vanessa's shoe, half buried beneath the new gravel. The same white paint remained around its edge. I crouched, brushed away the dust, and photographed the stamped numbers. Vanessa stepped closer. "Do not disturb association property." I stood and looked at her. I did not disturb anything. Then my phone vibrated. One message from Sheriff Mercer. "We are on the ranch road." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. Vanessa followed my eyes toward the service road. For the first time that morning, her smile disappeared. The distant sound came slowly at first, tires rolling across 8 miles of gravel, then engines climbing the final grade beyond the cedar ridge. Wedding guests began turning their heads. The violin music continued, soft and polished, while a thin cloud of dust rose above the trees. Vanessa folded her arms. "Did you call the sheriff over a property disagreement?" No, I said. I gave his office the records. The first county vehicle appeared around the bend. Then a second. Behind them came a white survey truck carrying equipment racks on top. Vanessa stared at all three vehicles approaching the entrance she had built across my road. I watched her eyes drop toward the steel marker at her feet. That was when she finally understood this was no longer an argument between neighbors. The first county vehicle stopped beside my pickup, and Sheriff Daniel Mercer stepped out without hurry. No flashing lights. No dramatic entrance. Just boots on gravel, a tan uniform, and a thick folder tucked beneath his arm. A second vehicle parked behind him, followed by the survey truck. Two county surveyors climbed out carrying equipment cases and a tripod. The wedding music softened as more guests noticed what was happening. Vanessa moved first. "Sheriff, thank goodness," she said, recovering her polished smile. "This man is trespassing and disrupting a private event." Mercer looked at me, then at Vanessa. "Mr. Barrett is the property owner who contacted our office." Her smile froze. "He owns Blackridge Ranch. This is Silver Pine's property. That is what we are here to verify." One surveyor walked directly toward the steel cap beside the entrance. Vanessa stepped into his path. "You cannot conduct some random survey during a wedding." Mercer opened his folder. "Ma'am, this is not random." The surveyor brushed gravel from the marker and read the stamped identification aloud. His partner set up the tripod farther down the road. I could hear the electronic chirp of their equipment between notes from the violin. Vanessa kept talking. Historical access, county permits, community improvements. Every phrase sounded weaker than the one before it. 20 minutes later, the surveyors confirmed what my own measurements had shown. The monument was authentic. The recorded Blackridge boundary matched my closing survey and the older county plats. The line on Vanessa's permit map was displaced. 27 feet at the control point, widening across the meadow until nearly the entire resort sat on my side. Mercer turned toward Vanessa. "Who provided the boundary information used for these applications?" "Our development consultant handled that. Your signature appears on the filings." Her fingers tightened around the leather folder. "I relied on professional information." Mercer removed several printed photographs. Trail camera stills. The Silver Pines maintenance pickup. The white marking paint. The crew near the buried monument. Vanessa stared at them without speaking. Then he asked the question that finally emptied all the confidence from her face. "Who authorized your contractors to alter or conceal these boundary monuments?" The gravel seemed impossibly loud beneath the surveyor's boots. Vanessa looked toward the pavilion, then toward the guests, as if someone in the crowd might provide an answer. Nobody did. Mercer explained that the county had suspended activity tied to the disputed permits pending a formal investigation into the filings and boundary interference. The commercial event could not continue operating on land Silver Pines had not established a legal right to use. Nobody was dragged away. Nobody shouted. The wedding coordinator quietly gathered the couple and their families while staff began arranging an alternate reception location. That mattered to me. The bride and groom had not stolen anything. They had paid someone who claimed she had the right to sell them this place. Vanessa had created their problem, not them. Then Rachel Monroe's car rolled into the meadow. She stepped out carrying the certified property records and walked straight toward us. Vanessa saw her and whispered, "You planned this." I shook my head. "No, I documented it." Rachel handed Mercer the final certified plat. The surveyor stretched a bright line between two verified monuments. It ran across the entrance, through the parking area, and beyond the pavilion. Vanessa followed it with her eyes. 3 months of construction, advertising, contracts, and confident signatures had not moved that line 1 inch. She had spent a fortune building around a fact she could never own. For the next 6 weeks, Blackridge was quieter than it had been since the day I bought it. The construction crews disappeared first. Then the Silver Pine signs came down. The county froze the disputed permits while investigators reviewed the altered filings, contractor records, and boundary evidence. Vanessa resigned as Homeowners Association president before the board could finish its emergency review. Her attorney handled most communication after that. I never saw the white sport utility vehicle at my gate again. The final property determination was almost painfully simple. Blackridge Ranch owned the meadow. Blackridge owned the service road. The recorded utility easement remained exactly what Walter Grady's record said it was, 12 feet wide, and limited to legitimate utility maintenance. Silver Pines had no recreational easement, no commercial use right, and no authority to build a wedding business there. The county required the association and its insurers to address the unauthorized construction and restoration costs. Rachel handled the paperwork while I handled the land. That was the part one cared about. One cool morning in early fall, I stood beside the pavilion with a cordless drill and removed the Willow Crest Wedding Estate sign myself. The screws squeaked coming out of the cedar. When the last one released, the wooden sign settled into my hands, surprisingly heavy for something that had represented so little truth. I stored it in the equipment barn instead of throwing it away, not as a trophy, as a reminder. The pavilion itself stayed. Tearing down a perfectly usable structure just because Vanessa had built it for the wrong reason felt wasteful. After everything was legally resolved and the county approved the proper use, I converted the building into an open ranch gathering shelter. Local agricultural groups could use it for meetings. Neighbors could hold community events there with permission. Walter Grady even came back one Saturday for a cattle management workshop and stood under those cedar beams laughing at the strangest improvement Blackridge had ever received. The parking area was reduced, native grass went back along the creek, and I restored the sections of fence that had been removed. The service road returned to being what it had always been, private ranch access with a narrow utility easement running beside it. No grand entrance. No association banners. No invented community rights. A month later, I walked the eastern boundary just after sunrise. The grass was silver with dew, and the air smelled like cedar and cold limestone. When I reached the old steel survey cap, I stopped. The white paint Vanessa's crew had sprayed across it was fading. I crouched and wiped the mud from the stamped numbers with my thumb. That little piece of steel had survived construction equipment, altered maps, legal letters, and months of somebody insisting reality was negotiable. Vanessa had spent money trying to make a different line exist. She had printed it on maps, submitted it with permits, advertised it online, and built an entire business around it. None of that changed where the real boundary stood. I rose and looked across the meadow toward the pavilion glowing gold in the morning sun. She thought ownership was whatever she could put on a sign. Turns out ownership was the piece of steel she tried to hide in the ground. I learned something from Blackridge that year. You do not always beat arrogance by being louder. Sometimes you measure twice. You save every document. You let the facts stay exactly where they are. Then you wait. Justice is not loud. It is smart, patient, and inevitable.